Okay, everybody, I'd like to welcome you back to another episode on Biz West Michigan. I'm really excited. I've got another friend of mine on the show who I've gotten to know really over the past year or so. We've got Ronen Shefer from ROCG Americas. And rather than go into a really long intro for Ronen, I thought what we would do is I'm going to give you a little bit of background. He started ROCG Americas. He has grown that business immensely. He's in multiple countries now doing multiple things and has regional offices, national offices, international offices. A little bit of background on Ronen is he is a graduate of Grand Valley State University, and he and his wife Teresa are split between West Michigan and Florida for their offices. So, Ronen, without further ado, welcome back to Biz West Michigan.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it, Rob.
You're welcome. So, obviously, with everything that's going on in the marketplace, ROCG Americas is really focused on kind of business consulting, as you call it.
Yep.
Acute business issues and succession planning. So why don't you just give us a quick overview of what people can expect from ROCG and kind of what makes you guys a little different?
Yeah, I mean, ROCG is essentially a business consulting firm. It really was created and founded by what I like to call recovering CPAs. It's just people that's been in the industry for a little bit, but realize that there's some more advice that we can give business owners instead of just continuously looking back at what they've done last year. I think about 10% of what we do, we deal with startups. People will come to our offices, they will pitch their concept, pitch their ideas. We'll help them formulate it. If it is an idea that requires a little bit of, go-to-market strategy, we'll help them with that. A lot of time for free. We consider that almost our farm system, to use a baseball analogy. I think around 45% is what you mentioned, the acute, business issues. Somebody would, my revenues drop in, profitability issues, organizational design. I just lost my key employee. I need to implement system and processes, that type of stuff. And then finally, what really, became our, bread and butter services and what our claim to fame in recent years has been our succession and transition planning services, is really helping business owners, plan for their exits, but also stage their business so it can go from one ownership group to the next.
Awesome. And I know that when you and I were chatting about the interview beforehand, I've had just multiple discussions over the past month or so, 2 months, with clients and friends and just associates. The concept of succession planning is one that, obviously a lot of people get they get very nervous about it. They don't. In most cases, they haven't planned it. It's almost like something happens in their life. They get some sort of a life event or a business event, and they're like, you know what? I've got to start thinking about what my next step is. Or
I mean, part of it is a demographic, right? I mean, baby boomers. I mean, they're retiring. We did a survey, probably the most extensive survey in North America, actually back in '08 and '09, and asked about 500 business owners. And the reality is, amazingly enough, that 6 out of the 10 businesses are going to change hand in the next 5 years, right? So the 60% of businesses are looking to change hands in the next 5 years. And probably more astonishing than that is only 9% of them have a written plan of how to do that. So there's a little disconnect there, right?
Right. So, with that said, I mean, that's a lot of what you guys do. I mean, and I think that part of the reason that, and maybe I'm wrong, you could tell us, but part of the reason you guys have been successful is, there's a lot of words that people use when they think of consultants and when they think of business consultants, some of them positive, some of them completely misconstrued. You guys have been successful because you're just coming in, you're former CPAs or you are CPAs, and you're looking at it from a business perspective. You try and take a little bit of the emotion out of it, right?
Well, I mean, I think it's probably slightly the other way around. It's because I think that we're taking a look at the business, certainly, and the business being the catalyst for a lot of the planning. But what makes this unique is the ability to dive into the emotional aspect of it. You have to consider that a business owner have worked and developed their business, for the last 20, 30 years. It's almost another child. And for them to think about exiting, it's a very emotional journey. And a lot of deals and a lot of transactions actually don't go through because of that emotional attachment to the business. It's almost like the business is relying on the owner and the owner is relying on the business, for the livelihood. And I think what makes this unique is that understanding of the dynamic and psychology of what's happening, during the transition. And look, I think that the bottom line is business owners have a hard time leaving something. They have an easier time going towards something. So if we can show them what's going to happen the day after, and what we call the kind of the glass door retreat. Let's take a look on the other side of the glass door. What is happening on the other side? Can we plan for that? Can we make all the contingency? So now it gets them a little bit more excited on the opportunity to get to that next level instead of being stuck in the business that they are right now.
Well, and you brought up a really good point in that a lot of the business owners, if it's been a successful business, they've got a lot of their heart and soul in that business, and to try and think about in a lot of cases they think, well, it's not going to be able to run without me, and in some cases they're right. Hopefully that I'm a big fan of Michael Gerber's book. And the E-Myth, where it's, if you're relying on it, then it's not a business, it's a job. You may own your job, but I think that's, from what I can understand from what you and I have talked about in the past and everything else, you're really about making sure that they identify what their system and processes are, so that they can transition out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two parallel paths that we in. One is the emotional, psychological path with the business owners, and get them to think about related to the business and what point in time. I think the other path is, how do we stage the business? Because ultimately the business needs to be independently self-sustained, so we can move it from one ownership group to the next. And it doesn't matter if it's the kids, in one instance, or key management, or a third party. It's almost like, I always say, when you go to sell a house, it's smart for you to do your own home inspection, so you know what's wrong with it. And then you try to fix the issues, and stage a house so you can get the best value for what you built. It basically works the same way. So we help them, take a look at it. What's holding them in the business? How can we make changes on that aspect of it? I think a lot of times the spouse plays a big role, in the transition planning, whether it's a wife or a husband. I think in a lot of cases, entrepreneurs spend a lot of their time in the business, and you have the spouse on the other side that just keeps waiting. We certainly have one of these sessions where, in this case, the wife said, look, I've been waiting for you for 25 years, and now I'm hearing that you want to work until you're 75. That's not going to cut it. We're going to have to create something different. So you have that piece of it, and then you have the piece of really taking a look at what makes the business tick and how we can make it a sustainable model. Because I think a lot of time what you see, perhaps, and what you refer to as the, 10 or so, people that you talk to that are looking at transition, is the unfortunate is when people start thinking about transition is kind of on a downslope, when it's stopped being fun, they're burned out, and unfortunately, those situations don't garner the biggest value for the business, right? You almost have to create another cycle and then sell it on the top versus, on its way down.
Well, and that's a really interesting point. I know that one of my good friends is a realtor, and she'll start talking to people that are interested in selling their house, and in a lot of cases, what ends up happening is these people go in and they get their house ready to sell, and they fall in love with their house again. And she says it's kind of frustrating, but at the same time, it's exciting to see that, because she just likes, she's the kind of a person that gets people excited about where they live.
Yeah.
And so do you see that same thing happening with businesses, where people think, okay, it's maybe time for me to move on, try something different, or I've got to go to the next stage? How many times do you see people where they kind of re-engage and re-energize and decide that they do need to take it to the next step, or take it up to the next phase?
Well, I think if they re-engage for a different reason. Perhaps I think it really starts with how soon do you start planning. If you're 5 years or 10 years ahead of your potential exit time from the business, if we start planning today, that presents a lot more options for you in terms of what you can do in the business, include keep owning the business. From that perspective, it gives us time to structure the business the right way. But if you're at the point where you're 71, 75, and you really want to get out of the business within 6 months, then that leaves less option. Ultimately, whether you're 35 or 75, the graduate level of business ownership is you owning the business but not having to run it on a day-to-day basis. So if we can get you to that point, and look, one of the reasons we set the office here in Florida is because we have those businesses that what I consider reach the graduate level of business ownership, where they can come down to South Florida for 4 or 5 months out of the year, and the business is still running up in Michigan or somewhere in our northeast office locations.
Interesting. So obviously you guys have expanded. I mean, tell me a little bit about where your different offices are now.
Well, we got in Canada, we got the offices in Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, clearly Grand Rapids, which is kind of the base. We got Boston, Jacksonville, and Seattle. Those are North America. We got 4 other affiliate offices in Australia and 2 in Europe.
Wow. So you've grown, and that's happened. What do you see happening as far as organizations like yours, where and you guys have grown to those number of offices. Now those are partner offices, so you've got people that are kind of running those offices themselves. What kind of challenges have you faced when you're doing that? What kind of growth challenges have you guys had?
Well, I mean, I think that the challenge for us, and I think it continues to be to some extent, I mean, the biggest challenge in consulting practices is being able to create the leverage that you need in the organization. So, as you can imagine, when you're working with a business owner, you have to have a certain level of knowledge, understanding. It's not necessarily somebody that can come out of college,
right?
Like you would in our old experience in the CPA firm. You can bring somebody with a degree and get them started, on the upward mobility. In our organization, you need somebody with, a lot of skill and the ability to think off their feet, because when they're at a client location, they're there to implement,
right.
A certain agenda. So you have to have a certain amount of, skill level and expertise, and that's always been the challenge, to find the right people that can, think on their own, work on their own, and have that type of expertise in place.
So obviously the demographics are a big part of why you guys have been able to grow like you have. I mean, we talked about a little bit about the boomers and
Yep.
and kind of what's happening with that. Has there been anything else that you've seen? I mean, has there been any competitive changes that have allowed you guys to really take advantage of that, or?
No, I think that interestingly enough, I think partly it's the recession that businesses have experienced, in recent years. And prior to the recession, there's always been the term in our industry, when people need us the most, they can't afford us.
Right.
They get to the point where they need someone advice, it's the point that they can't afford us. And I think the people that have survived through the recession realize that, yeah, maybe I need, another set of skills in this business to get it to the next level. It's almost the business grew to the point of maximizing my capacity, as an owner, and I need fresh ideas, new tour guides, so to speak, to get me to the next level. And I think that impacted a little bit what we're seeing. The interesting part is, I would say that, a couple of years ago, particularly when it comes to succession plan and exit, people came to us with maybe 2 years left to plan. Now, and even in recent months, people are coming to us with 10 years.
Wow.
They're thinking 10 years ahead, which makes our job a lot easier.
Right. So one of the ways that you guys have been successful as well is that you're also working with their other professionals. So you get to know who their CPA or their accounting firm is. You get to know who their attorneys are. I think that's a thing that really sets you guys apart from the standpoint of a lot of the other consultants groups and consulting groups out there, especially on the small mid-market group. They want to have kind of an autonomous relationship. So do you see that as a benefit for you guys?
Yeah, and I think that certainly sets us apart. I think it creates a much more collaborative work environment with our referral sources. And I think it's a recognition, perhaps, that no advisors can know everything.
Really?
Yeah, from that perspective. I know sometimes we like to think so, but look, I mean, we see our role mainly with the business. Okay, right. So when an owner hires us, we basically tell them up front is the business is hiring us, because if we got to feel comfortable to tell you that you're part of the problem. So even though you might be signing the check, I mean, you might be part of the problem. And I think what we found the benefit of some of the other advisors is, they work mainly on on behalf of the owner. So whether it's their, CPA, their attorney, the wealth advisors, they're focused on the owner's objectives and what they're trying to do. And while we do, that certainly to some degree in what I said in terms of their psychological feeling in terms of business transition. We make sure that the business can support all the other plannings that the other advisors,
Right.
think about. And I think that the other important, and probably the last point on this thing is, it's important for this group to work together. I mean, a lot of time when we have a failed, transition planning is when the business owner goes to their CPA and they're talking about their business transition, needs and objectives, and the CPA works on their tax planning. And then independently they go to the attorney and they work on their estate planning, but none of these plans really talk to each other from that perspective. So really getting everybody, and I guess I would recommend to any business owner that's watching this video, get your group of advisors together, communicate your objectives to them, at one point in time, and let them work together on a much more, collaborative approach. You'll get the better plan this way.
Well, that's pretty much any plan. I mean, I know that, I don't really promote it that much, but with the books that I've written on business planning and strategic planning, the whole concept is you can craft your overall plan, but then you've got to share that plan with everybody else that's going to be involved, because if not, you're going to have, one group pulling this way and one group pulling that way and one group
Yeah.
and nothing good comes from that other than your arms get really, really long, and it's, nothing good comes from that. So obviously you guys are down in Florida. You and I chatted about it. Obviously you've gotten a little bit of rain recently with
just a little bit.
Tropical Storm Isaac. But business is good. You guys are doing well right now. I understand you're pretty busy.
Yeah, business is good. Again, I mean, I think that look, we've seen probably, since the fourth quarter of 2010, resurgent in the business environment. Keep in mind, I mean, our type of business, I mean, we're tied in, essentially to the small, medium-sized business community. So we actually saw, as the recession was hitting different business sectors, beginning, the fourth quarter of 2010, we saw those same sectors that got into the recession first coming out of it. And I think slowly, this thing has developed. But look, I mean, I think the reality is businesses today learn to do more with less, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's almost forced them to do that part of it. And I remember I wrote an op-ed, back I think in the summer of 2009, and I said, look, essentially the party is over. I mean, you can no longer make strategic decisions based on the availability of credit. So you had to make really smart decisions, regarding your business. And when you scale down and realize, look, I can make profits with, less people, more systems, more efficiency, then I'm building a much more sustainable business model.
Okay, I want to switch it up a little bit though.
Sure.
Obviously, within West Michigan business community, we've got some really cool stuff going on with Start Garden and the 5x5 nights and all of the business generation activity and the new business generation activity for startups, and then kind of re-energizing existing businesses. One of the services that you guys always talk about, and that I just love the fact that you guys do that, is working with startups, working with people that want to maybe start either a new company or a new division or whatever. Let's talk about what they need to do from a planning standpoint at the beginning. If we can just spend a couple minutes kind of you sharing what, if you had one piece of advice for somebody that's in startup mode or thinking of starting a new division, what are a couple of things that they should think about right away?
Yeah, I mean, I think, maybe the unfortunate part of it, the fortunate and unfortunate, depending how you look at it, a lot of, entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurs, they're very emotionally attached to their idea. So I think they have to remove themselves from that perspective. And I always say that the objective of a business is to satisfy a need. Okay, so let's make sure that there is actually a need out there. Do the research. I can't tell you how many times people came to our offices with an idea that already existed 3 years ago. So do a little bit of research and figure out, what particular niche, you're working on. Because look, ultimately the purpose is to make money, but the objective is to satisfy a need. And that need is what potentially could sustain the business. So when we do a lot of our exercise to validate their, strategic initiative, is to see, is there a need out there, and would people actually be willing to pay money for what you're offering? And I think it's a daunting exercise for the entrepreneur, because we do poke holes in their assumptions just to make sure that they have all the answers to some of the things that they've done enough research. And I think from that point, if we do establish that there's a need, then we have to spend a lot of time on, and the entrepreneur has to spend a lot of time on, what's my go-to-market strategy. Right. I think sometimes they spend a lot of time on kind of the business plan, my management team, here's a little bit of my product. but they're not spending enough time on what's my go-to-market strategy? How am I going to meet certain milestones the first quarter, the first year, to get this thing to market and get
Yep.
people to buy it? And that's the missing element.
And I think that one of the other challenges is that people get very wrapped up in the concept of the business as opposed to the actual operation of the business. And one of the things that I've always seen, and it's really the differentiation point on a lot of the planning and strategic planning that I do, both with startups and existing businesses, is get away from the concept. Like you said, focus on what the need is, and then put stuff in place to know that if what you're doing is working. So put some measurables in place and start doing it. I mean, the biggest determination if what's working or not is action. If you're not doing anything, then guaranteed nothing's gonna nothing's gonna happen. And then the whole idea of failing fast.
Yeah. And look, I've got several examples, I guess they're called horror stories. I mean, we dealt with one entrepreneur that created something. I won't go into details, but created something for for a vehicle, right? And we asked, I said, do you have it on your vehicle? And they said no.
Well, no.
So what gives over here, so to speak. But look, and I want to maybe clarify some of my points earlier. It's I'm not trying to say that if the item exists, you can make it better or
Right.
or compete with it, but have a clear understanding of what your differentiator in the marketplace and what's going to make people want your product more than what currently exists in the marketplace. And that's where the need comes into play.
Yep. And I think that one of the biggest challenges is that depending on what type of business they're starting or what type of whatever they're doing, and it doesn't matter if it's in my opinion, for this point, is it doesn't matter if it's a startup or if it's an existing business or a new division or whatever, is there are parts to every business, even if it's a true commodity, that you can still have a unique value proposition, unique selling proposition, a unique service proposition. I always call it a USP, and that can go, the S can stand for service, sales, whatever you want it to be. But what is the wedge that's going to make it so that people can choose you over your competitor?
Exactly.
And I had an opportunity to chat with Kevin Butelman from People Design, and we talked about the concept of innovation. And that was a great interview. If you haven't watched it, or if anybody that's watching the show now hasn't watched that episode, we really talked about what is innovation. And I think that there's this cloud, this mystical cloud around the idea of innovation, that it's got to be this earth-shattering, dimension-pulling concept. And sometimes it's just a tiny little change to something that makes it easier, faster, better, simpler, more effective or efficient or whatever. That's innovation. That's taking something that meeting a need and doing something with it. And I think that you've taken a very innovative approach to growing your business and your consulting business, because you took the little pieces and you made it better. So that's my little pep to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's nothing to say that we've done everything right from the very beginning. I mean, we certainly had our challenges. But look, I mean, I think that the last point regarding business startup and what we take a look at would be, we try to determine and then provide feedback to the entrepreneur whether or not they should be the one running the business ultimately, because they might be the visionary person, the person that came up with the idea and have the concept, but they might not be the right person to actually do it, implement it, run it, and if they can identify that in the very beginning, that could be the difference between a success and failure in that business, because the idea might be great, but because they're the one that's trying to launch it, with their ADD personality and everything else that goes along with it, that's potentially where it could fail.
Absolutely. So, I've taken a lot of your time. We've covered.
Oh, that's great. No, I'm glad
really
we got a
cool
chance
projects.
to do this.
So here's a hook question. Looking back on your business, looking baking on your career, looking at ROCG specifically, if you could go back and say that there was one thing you do differently, or one mistake that you've made, or knowing what you know now, what would you do differently, or what's the biggest mistake you've made?
It goes back perhaps to an earlier comment. I think if we should have or could have figured out the leverage issue a lot quicker in the process. I think it took us longer than what I think initially thought it was, to figure out how to bring people in and make them productive as quickly as we can. And it does takes a lot. I mean, you have to take a look at your system. You have to create an orientation process or a turnkey, process that somebody coming in, assuming that they have the experience and everything that you need, but how to mold them into quote unquote ROCG consultant and what that takes. And I think if we got through it, but I think if we would have got through it a lot earlier in the process, we would have been farther along, at this point.
Right. So the whole concept of bringing new employees, new consultants up to speed faster
Yeah.
with what you're set with.
Yeah, I mean, look, ultimately, it works in every business. It's kind of a, business 101 fundamentals is in order for the company to grow, people have to work themselves out of a job, right? To get to the next level. So, I mean, if the company, doubles or triples, I mean, you're going to need two of me at some point in time, right? So you have to create a system to bring people up. And a lot of time, I think, as business owners, we tend to take that, for granted. We don't pay that much attention to the people development piece until you reach what I call the brick wall, where you say, I'm going to need to create leverage in order to get to the next level.
Right. That's a great point, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think that there's been a pretty consistent message in that, everybody says that the ideas are great and everything else, but if you don't have the right assets in place, and a lot of times that your highest value assets are your people. So that's great advice, Ronen.
Thanks.
So that's pretty much it. Like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time on here. I'll make sure that I have the links down below to your site, and if people want to reach out to you and get in touch with you guys if they need some help or whatever, we'll have that available. So again, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, not a problem. And I think it's worth mentioning that to sit down with us, it doesn't cost anything, whether you're a startup or an existing business. We tend to invest, at least 5 or 6 hours with a business owner before we even considered engaging with them. I think our motto has always been, we get paid to solve the problem, not to identify them. So, sitting down and doing the discovery doesn't cost anybody anything.
Right. Well, cool. Well, again, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah,
and
appreciate it.
Everybody, thanks again for watching Biz West Michigan, and we'll talk with you soon. Thanks, everybody.